now we're recording. All right, so we're going over the short story analysis source requirements. There are 6 sources total. They should be the original short story text for close reading. And that close reading is just you and the text, showing your reader very carefully what you see in the story. So we start with that, and that's why I was so strict about you learning how to do a close reading with no other sources in the poetry analysis, so that you could do that again here. All right, and then we are going to do number 2. Napoleon, read me number 2.
One source allowing you to write about the biography of the author.
Right, so one source that allows you to write about the biography of the author. And we're going to talk about what we're going to concentrate on for biography here in a few minutes. But that will be one of the sources you can locate using Google. Now, you can use the databases if you'd like to. That's certainly not prohibited. If you want to look into history and biography in the databases, I'll show you how. But you can also do that in a Google search, and I'll show you how to evaluate those sources and see which ones are good and which ones are not so great. Okay? All right. One source allowing you to talk about the history the story's characters were living in. So none of them are living in the 2020s. They're all older than that. And our culture has changed significantly from even the most recent of these, which is probably either the Amy Tan or the Alice Walker, and even those are much earlier. They're in a whole different culture because the history was different, right? So we're going to be looking at the history around the story that the characters were living in, because that helps us understand the story better, right? To understand the history that was going on for those characters that they were living in. All right, number 4, Devin, read us number 4 here.
One source allowing you to talk about culture ideas that story I want to change.
All right, so one source allowing you to talk about the cultural ideas that the story is engaged with or wanting to change. We want to make sure that we're thinking about which cultural things we want to focus on, and which ones are going to be the focus of the literary criticism that we're going to be coming up. So you don't want to choose the fact that Mama and Dee were living rurally without grappling with the fact that Wanjero was engaging with the Back to Africa and Black nationalist and Black Muslim movements that were going on at the same time. Otherwise, you're missing half of it, right? So we can't just do half of what's important. So we got to think about that. All right. And then number 5. Who's going to read me number 5? Zakia, can you read number 5? Articles. Let's edit that to be correct grammar. 2 articles, plural, of literary. There we go.
Of literary criticism, allowing you to join the literary conversation about this text.
Okay, so we're going to find 2 articles of literary criticism. Literary criticism is stuff that people like me who are scholars in the field have written about these stories, and we're going to join that conversation with other scholars. All right, so the original text was provided to you. Biography, history, and cultural context articles will be drawn from class searches, and students will form a list of approved sources together. That means that you are not going to be able to use every source you find. We will compile what you find into a list that the class will use together, okay? So you'll have to draw from that approved list after we create it together. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're going to be trying to find them and hoping that we do a good job and hoping yours makes the list so that you can use it. But I am not going to let someone use a substandard source. Yes? So if you struggled with your Google search, you'll have some backup and you'll get to draw from the sources that are approved. All right. You will draw your literary criticism from the Alabama Virtual Library. databases, and we have a video showing you how to use the Alabama Virtual Library. You can locate the same databases through the Lawson State Community College databases. It's just that when I created this assignment for us in our very first March of 2020 virtual time, the library at Lawson was having some trouble with access for students off campus. We've resolved that issue now, and I'm going to try to update the tutorials for you so that you can use either one. Either one is fine. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close that out. Are there questions about the source requirements for the essay? This is a preview. I'm going to walk you through the steps of it, but that's a preview. Are there questions about the sources you'll be expected to use? All right, let's talk about the developing a thesis then. This is tricky, and this is a big thing that we're doing this week. Remember when we went from theme to thesis in our poetry assignment as we were building that? This is a lot the same way. You're looking to develop a thesis. We've already done some of the work for this when you went from topic to main idea. And the main idea is very close to the thesis we're going to develop, but you are going to work on a very careful and particular thesis. And on this one, I love you, but there are right and wrong answers. I'm not going to let you develop a thesis where you're not going to be able to find any research to support it. And I know what the research is, right? Because I've already done the research on all 4 of these authors. So I do need to make sure I'm guiding you to thesis statements that can be supported by the research that's out there. Yes? Are we understanding that? I'm going to have to be a little bossy here. I'm still going to ask you to make sure that you are coming up with them because I want to make sure you understand how to do that. But if you're off target, I will gently guide you back to where you need to be. Just so that you don't get stuck with a thesis that doesn't work. Remember that in the videos on understanding these sources, if you listen carefully, I'm trying to tell you what the main ideas and theses are for them. I'm not trying to be subtle there. So make sure you've watched those videos, even if you came to the class where you discussed the literature with us. Make sure you watch those as you're trying to develop your main ideas and theses, okay? Because I'm leading you to them in those videos, okay? All right. Let's have Alan. Can you read this to me, this little preface?
This essay, we are developing a thesis about the cultural and historical impact of a piece of literature. This means we are asserting that the author wanted to teach the reader something important about history or culture through the story and the characters they used. Below are some samples of this kind of thesis. Okay, so this is a different thesis than we had before. In the last one, you could just talk about the theme and be off and running, right? You could say, okay, I think they're teaching us this about loss, or I think they're teaching us this about choices, right? But here we are trying to look specifically at why they're putting their characters in that moment in history and what they're trying to teach us about cultural shifts and changes, okay? So it's a cultural and historical analysis. And I see a spelling mistake assignment. Okay. Sometimes I type too fast. The other day, this is really fine. All right. So as we read these, we're going to go through and take a look at the formula because there is a formula for these. And yes, you can print this out or you can take some notes on it or you can start working on your own while we go over these. But this is the formula I want for your thesis statements. So, Courtney, can you read number 1 to us, please?
Yes. In Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne uses the character of Hester Prynne to show that women were treated unfairly when it came to adultery in the American culture, early American culture.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have a few things. We're naming the author and the title in the beginning of it. We are saying Hawthorne uses a character or shows us something. And then we are saying what it is that they are showing us about the culture. Okay? So there are kind of three parts there. All right? Let's see. Assad, can you read number 2?
The novel The Color Purple, Alice Walker shows that black women were doubly oppressed by white people and then oppressed again by white males.
Okay. So we're talking about the novel The Color Purple, and the author is mentioned here. And then there's a thesis that black women were doubly oppressed by white people, and then again oppressed by black males. Is this arguable? Could you say that's not true? Could you get mad at it and argue with it? Yes, you could. You could say, no, I think that's unfair to the black men that we're talking about here. You could get annoyed. If you read the book, though, it becomes pretty clear that at least Alice Walker thought that was true. You remember, again, I talked about this with a couple of my students when it came to the poetry. You don't have to believe the idea of the thesis. You're just proving that the author did, right? So you don't have to believe that black males oppressed black women. You just have to be able to prove that Alice Walker did. Does that make sense? Okay, we got to make sure we clarify that. Okay, because we might not agree with what the authors are trying to get across. We might disagree with it ourselves. That doesn't mean that that's not what they were trying to teach us. Does that make sense? All right. Okay. Let's see. Jakaya, can you read number 4 to us?
In the short story, The Pearl, John Steinbeck uses the death of the infant to illustrate how dangerous it was to be poor in 1930s America.
Okay, good. Oh, I skipped one. We'll go back to it. In the short story, The Pearl, so we've got the name of the story, and then the author uses what happens in the story to prove something about culture. Okay, and we're following that formula over and over again. In this story, the author uses what happens or who's in it to illustrate this about the culture. Okay? And we're seeing that over and over again. Can we back up and have Morgan read us number 3?
In the novel Ceremony, Leslie Marmon Silka shows us that Western medicine was not able to heal the PTSD of the Native American soldier as well as the Native American ceremonial medicine did.
Fantastic. Okay, so there we are working, again, same formula. We've named the piece, we've named the author. We're saying they show us what happened in the story to prove something about the culture, right? And we've got those 3 pieces in there every single time. Let's see. Bryce, can you read us the 5th one?
In the short story A Rose for Emily, the author mocks the common belief of the time that being an unmarried woman was a fate worse than death.
Fantastic. Okay, and I don't remember who wrote A Rose for Emily. I think it was Faulkner. Who wrote A Rose for Emily? I need to look that up immediately. Let's fix it. A Rose for Emily. Let's find out who wrote that real quick. Faulkner. I was correct. Hot dog. Okay, and so we don't use the author, use the author's name. William Faulkner mocks the common belief of the time that being an unmarried woman was a fate worse than death. Again, we have the short story, the author, what happens in the story, unmarried woman, and what they're trying to teach us about the culture. And so I want this over and over again. So it says in your assignment this week, you are working to develop a working thesis for each of the short stories we're working with today. Here's the formula for this kind of statement. Name the story and the author. Say what you think the author is trying to teach the reader about the culture in which the characters are living. What does the story hope to show, illustrate, or change about that culture? So we're going to talk about our class discussions and all that. If you weren't here, make sure you watch the videos on what the stories are about, because again, I'm trying to lead you to these. I'm not trying to leave you to figure them out by yourselves. All right, questions about this assignment? Let's take a look at it in assignment form here for the end of the week, the thesis statements assignment. I'm going to move you guys. Move over here. Okay. So for this assignment, it says, after reviewing the sample thesis statements in the handouts this week, please try your own. Please write 4 thesis statements, 1 for each of the short stories we have read and discussed. Please make sure you have reviewed our class discussions about each story if you were absent from Zoom classes. Please make sure your thesis statements follow the model and formula outlined in this week's handouts. Please skip a space between each thesis statement. What's going to happen after this is that I'm going to tell you which your strongest thesis is, and you are going to work with that story. Okay, so if you really want to work with a particular story, make sure that's your strongest thesis statement. Some of you will have a choice of 4, because all 4 of yours are strong, and I will say you can choose any of these. Some of you will struggle with 2 or 3 of them, and you will have a choice of 2 or 3. And I can say you can choose any, but this one was weak, don't choose that one. Okay, because if you're not getting a story, really don't work with it. Okay, some of you, I'm just going to say you should pick the Gilman because it's your strongest thesis. Take that and run with it. Okay. And then some of you will need to redo the assignment because you're not understanding a thesis, and we need to stop and correct before we go on. Okay? Questions about this? Let me stop the share and double check whether there are questions. I'm also going to stop recording so I don't have to record all. All right, so I'm going to take a quick recap of this while we're recording. 3 sources from the internet, 1 biography of the author, 1 historical context, 1 for cultural context. This is a sample of what the format ought to look like, and your links should be linked, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. And you'll notice that these links are either little jokes about doing your own work, and then they are things that I think would help you. This one on history is evaluating online sources, and this one is some resources for historical research online. So they're not what you'll be providing. Didn't want to do that for you. But I want to show you these links work here. But I want to, when I'm typing a response, let's say I want to use this website. You simply grab the URL and click Control-C or copy it, and you put it in, but you're not done. That's not how you format. You have to highlight it and click on link, and then link the URL, paste it again there. And when it turns blue and it's underlined, now you have a link. So I can put that up, and then my entry should be under Monisha's entry here. Where is it? Where'd it go? There it is. And now I can click on that link and it takes me to it. Yes? Okay, so questions, I'm going to delete that. Does anybody need me to go over that again? How to link your article. You type your response, you copy in the link, you highlight it, you click on the link, you copy it again, and then you insert it, and when it's blue and underlined, it is linked. Okay? I need to be able to follow your links by clicking on them. Yeah? Questions about that? Hot dog.
Can you do that one more time? I didn't get to see it. I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. All right, so we're going to grab our link from online. You just simply Control-C to copy, or you can right-click, and then you paste it in the space. You highlight it. You click on link. you copy it, you paste it again in there, and then click insert, and when it's blue and underlined, you have a successful link. Yes? And then you just click respond. Okay? And you're going to do that, but you're going to format it this way. So you're going to have the title and the author, and then you're going to say biography and a colon, and history and a colon, and culture and a colon, and then you're going to have your links. This I can work with because I can copy and paste it into my browser, but it's going to be even easier if we go ahead and do that extra step to link it. Yes? Questions about that? I love the way Monisha has it set up. She's done it very methodically. Everyday Use by Alice Walker, Biography, History, Culture. Two Kinds by Amy Tan, Biography, History, Culture. She set it up exactly perfectly the way I asked her to. I hadn't taught her how to link it yet, so she didn't do that. And look, she can click on these 3 dots to edit her post, right? So Monisha, do you see where I'm clicking on edit? It's on these 3 dots in the corner. All right, so whenever you want to edit your post, you just click on those 3 dots in the corner and you can edit what you've put in there. And that way you don't have to start from scratch or delete your entry if you work ahead and then something needs to change a little bit once you've learned what we're doing. Does that make sense? Hot dog.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, good. No shame in being ahead, my love. I'm so excited to see that in there. All right. So let's actually take a look at internet sources, okay? I'm going to go to this site first, okay? So I'm going to make this a little bigger so that we can look at that. This is one of the links. I'm not being sarcastic in this one. I was in the first one, but let's take a look at this for a sec. How do you determine if a source is credible? You can evaluate the reliability and scholarship of information you find both online and in print by using these guidelines. Can somebody read us the one that says authorship? Corian, can you read that to us?
Yeah. If the author is not identified, be wary.
Be wary, yeah.
When the article or website is authored anonymously, it has a little credibility. It should be evident who created the content, what are the author's credentials, does she have expertise in this field, is biographical information provided.
Great. Okay, so we want to make sure we know the author, that they have credibility. Anonymous authors don't have a ton of credibility. That's a dubious choice. It should be evident who created the content and what their credentials are. Awesome. Nikayla, can you read about the publisher, please?
This is a determined document. For example, whether it is produced by an established publisher, a government agency, a non-profit organization, or a commercial website. Consider the publisher's reputation and trustworthiness.
Fantastic. And Morgan, can you read about accuracy and objectivity?
Can the facts presented on a website be sustained elsewhere? Beware of information that can be confirmed or the presence on bias. You always check multiple sources to determine credibility.
Great. I want to do a trick with you here. We take this, we copy it, we put it here, we actually just type it into Google, and we hit enter, and look, there's a little icon. You ready?
Substantiate. Substantiate. Substantiate.
It's not playing. Sorry. It'll play it for you. I don't know why it's not playing. I think my microphone might be weird. Maybe this lady will play it for me.
Grammarly can help you write quickly and confidently, so you never have to slow down at work. Stay on top of emails, documents, and...
I think it's because I got too many things going.
Substantiate.
It is. I got too many things going. All right.
Substantiate.
But you can just click on it and learn how to pronounce it. It's pronounced substantiated. And you can just click that little icon on your browser and have that just say it for you. Okay?
Hello.
So if you're ever trying to sound
My name's
something out
Alex.
like that,
And if you want to learn
click it
about
into
and
your
improve
browser,
your English
look at the
pronunciation,
definition, 'cause
you've
if you
come
can't
to the right
pronounce it,
place.
chances are the word's
There are
unfamiliar to you.
videos,
So check
quizzes,
the definition, and you can click on
activities,
the little speaker
and
icon and have it
downloads
pronounce
to
it
help
for
you practice your English.
Awesome.
Now, good
let's
pronunciation
see.
is
Bryce,
very
can you read to
important
us
for
about
good spoken
timeliness?
communication. But what do we mean by good pronunciation? Well, you don't have to
Alan,
speak
can you
English
read to
like a
us about
native speaker.
timeliness?
It's fine to have a different accent.
Be aware of when the
But
web
what is
page has
important
created,
is that you're
was
able to
created,
speak
how recently
clearly
it's been updated.
and that you
Is
don't
the
prevent
information
other
current?
people from
Outdated
understanding what you're
information
trying
or
to
broken
say.
links indicate the page is not
There are
being
many
maintained.
different English accents
Great,
in
thank
Britain
you.
and all around the world.
And
These
Kyria,
are
can
all
you read
good
us
models.
about footnotes and bibliographies?
Now, my accent is standard Southern British English, and that's what I'll be showing you on this site. Have fun.
Well, I keep legitimate references to other sources can add to documents crediting a bit of scholarship.
Scholarship, very good. What does that mean?
Ooh. Look at this. Look at this one.
It means that when they offer a good bibliography at the end, or what you would call a works cited list, and those are also good sources, then you know you've got somebody who really did their research, right? If they're not citing any
This is a
sources
short
at the
vowel
end,
sound.
they're maybe just
It's
making
pronounced
it up. It's
I.
not so reliable.
Now you
Great.
try.
Devin,
Listen
can you read
and
to us about
repeat after
sponsorship?
me. I.
Some sites are officially approved by the parent organization.
Now here are
to
some
which they're
words which have this
Others
sound.
can be on a parent
Kit,
site, but not officially sponsored by the
bid,
organization. A personal
hymn,
homepage on the university server does
minute.
not automatically confer credibility.
Now you
Right.
try.
So if
Listen
something is
carefully
sponsored
and
by a
repeat after
university,
me.
that's credible. But if something
Kit,
is sponsored just by an individual instructor at that
bid,
university, it may not have the university's seal
hymn,
of approval, right? So double check that. So this is a good way
minute.
to start thinking about what we're going to find. So let's look for something with just a real easy Google search for
For speakers of some
biography.
languages, it may be difficult to tell the difference between this vowel,
Well, that would be
the
good.
short vowel I, and another sound, the long vowel
Alice
E.
Walker. We'll start with her.
Listen carefully to hear the difference between
So
the two.
we have
In each
biography.com,
pair of
and I'm going to take
examples,
a look at that.
I'll
We
say
have
the short
Britannica.
sound
What's Britannica, though?
first. Hit. Heat.
Encyclopedia.
It's an
Lip.
encyclopedia, so we're going to
Leap.
try to skip the encyclopedias if we can.
Seek.
We're definitely going to skip
Will.
Wikipedia. What's Wikipedia?
Wheel. Now you try. Listen carefully and repeat after me.
Garbage.
Hit.
It's not always garbage. The funny thing is that
Heat.
a lot of the information is actually pretty decent,
Lip.
but the thing is, I could go in there and add
Leap.
stuff to Alice Walker's biography this afternoon
Sick.
without ever looking anything up about Alice Walker. And it would take
Seek.
them a while for somebody to notice that I put some nonsense in there and to fix it and correct it. So,
Wheel.
yeah, I've actually
Good.
corrected Wikipedia articles where I saw incorrect information about the author I was reading about. So, not great, right? People just put in stuff that's not true, and that.
This
and
is a short
because
vowel
most of us
sound.
don't
It's
know
pronounced
enough
ooh.
about all these different
Now you
authors
try.
to recognize
Repeat
what's not
after
true.
me.
You could be getting false
Ooh.
information. So not Wikipedia, please.
Ooh.
So we have notable
Now here are some
biographies. I
words
like
which
that
have
one.
this
So
sound.
I'm gonna, and then Cliff's
Foot.
Notes. Are we using Cliff
Put.
Notes, or am I gonna poke you in the
Good.
eye?
Now you try.
Cliff's
Listen
Notes are a
carefully
no.
and repeat
Easy
after
bit.
me.
No.
Foot.
Right. Those things that are designed to make it
Put.
easier for high school
Good.
students. No. FemBio
That's
is
good.
actually pretty good. I'm going to open this one. If you're paying attention, I'm helping you with your homework. All right. So we've got this one. Alice Walker has the concept of
This is a
feminism.
short vowel
We want to
sound.
make sure that this
It's
is
pronounced
relatively long,
Now you try.
right?
Repeat
look
after
at
me.
this. A summer spent in Kenya and Uganda exposed Walker to the ravages of
Now here are some
colonialism
words
and
which have this
disillusioned
sound.
somewhat her
Strut,
enthusiasm for the
mud,
African independence
love,
movements of the 50s and
blood.
early 60s.
Now you try.
Interesting.
Listen carefully
Does
and
that
repeat
tell us
after
maybe
me.
what her attitude might
Strut,
be about Wanjero?
mud, love,
Maybe why she's looking down her nose at Wanjero
blood.
a little bit? It does. Good. Okay, so I wanted to bring this up because I wanted to talk to you
For speakers of some languages, it may be
what we're
difficult
looking
to tell the
for
difference
here.
between this sound,
Does it
the short
matter?
vowel ah,
This is
and
one of
another
the first
sound,
things
the short
we
vowel
see.
ah.
That
Listen
she
carefully
was
to
shot
hear
with
the
a BB
difference.
gun in her left
For
eye
each
to blind
example,
her in one
I'll
eye.
say the word
And while
with the
that's
vowel
fascinating, does it have
first.
anything to do
Uncle,
with her story?
ankle, bunk, bank, butt, bat, cup, cap.
Maybe a
Swum,
little bit.
swam.
Maggie was also
Now
dealing
you
with
try.
some scars
Listen
that
carefully
made her
and repeat
self-conscious.
after me.
So maybe you
Uncle,
can make a connection there
ankle,
between the scar that Alice Walker was
bunk,
self-conscious about and the scar
bank,
that Maggie was self-conscious about. You could make
butt,
a connection there. Does it
bat,
matter where she went to high school or college?
cap, swum,
Maybe a little.
swam.
She received a
Good.
scholarship to attend Spelman College in Atlanta. Where did Dee go to college? Corian, where did Dee go to
This
college?
is a short vowel sound. It's pronounced o. Now you try. Listen carefully
She
and
went
repeat
to college in
after
Atlanta,
me.
didn't she?
O.
In Georgia? Huh.
O.
Interesting. So it's
Now
not
here are
named,
some words which
but I
have
want
this
you to
vowel
start
sound.
seeing the connections between the biography and the story.
Wash.
Yes?
Now you try.
And when
Listen
we're writing
carefully
about
and
it, we're
repeat
not
after
going to
me.
pick the stuff
Lot.
that doesn't connect to anything. Like
Odd.
she grew impatient with the restrictions at Spelman.
Wash.
Um,
Good.
And that might not be what you want to go for, right? So think about that. So think about despite poverty, discrimination in the face of Jim Crow laws and threats from the Klan, the Walkers
This is a
saw
short
to it their
vowel
children
sound.
attended school.
It's pronounced
This might tell you a little bit
and
about
to make
why
this sound,
she's
you just
interested
relax your mouth.
in this
You
connection
try.
between the
Listen
family
and
that
repeat.
stays home and struggles and the
And
young
again.
woman who goes off to college. Because
In
she was
fact,
that
this
young
is a
woman
very
who went
common
off to
sound
college.
in English.
Yes?
And in
And
many
when we're
grammar
looking at
words,
these
it's
biographies,
the only
we're trying
vowel
to
sound,
look for the
such
ones
as
that tell us things that
the,
make us go, oh,
of,
now I know why
that.
she's writing about this.
Let's practice these.
Yes?
Listen and repeat.
Okay. All right. Let's take a
The.
look at cultural context, because that's a
Of.
little trickier. Okay?
That.
Some of you are just
Now, you
typing
also
in
get this
cultural
sound
context
in many
and Alice
words of
Walker,
more than
and
one
that
syllable.
might get you to
Listen.
an
About.
encyclopedia page
Common.
or something for high school
Standard.
students.
Butter.
Instead,
Let's practice. Listen to me and repeat. About. Common.
we could look up something
Standard.
about the Black Muslim movement, and this is why I
Butter.
asked students to identify the
Good.
cultural context clues in that previous
You
assignment.
could say
so
that the
you
vowel
could look
"er"
up
is the most
the
important
cultural
vowel in
thing,
English.
not
In fact,
connected
it's so
necessarily
important it
with
has
the
its own
story and
name.
understand about
It's
it.
called
Okay?
John.
So you could
No,
do
not
that.
really.
You could
It's
also
actually called schwa.
so we get a bunch of things
Schwa,
here about
which is
the
pretty
Black
strange
Muslim
when you think
movement.
about it,
So
because the
we
word
know that they're
schwa
talking about that.
doesn't
we could
have
also
the schwa
say
sound
the
in it. So why is this sound so important? Well, it's a very natural sound for English speakers, and it's actually the most frequent sound in English. It appears in just about every word with more than 2 syllables, and it's very important for getting the stress and rhythm of
so we
English
could
right.
look about Marcus Garvey
Schwa
and
is usually
the Back
in
to Africa
unstressed
movement.
syllables.
Now it starts with
Let's have a
Wikipedia.
look
Are
at
we
some
staying there?
examples. Accuse.
We are not.
Banana.
Please. The first hit might
Father.
not be the one that you
Camera.
want.
Okay, now you try.
So-
Listen and repeat.
Oh, I like this one. This is out of
Accuse.
Stanford University. Historian
Banana.
situates the Back to Africa movements, plural,
Father.
in broad context.
Camera.
This might be a good place to start. And if we
Now,
look
as well
down
as
at
being
the
a
bottom,
part of many words,
yeah, we've
schwa
got a
can
good
also
lecture
be
here.
the
So
pronunciation
this
for
one
a
might be
whole
useful,
word itself.
right?
And to
but
show
we're
you
gonna
this,
take a
I'm
look.
going to need
I want
an
to look
assistant.
at battle royals in the Jim Crow era, because Jim Crow is a term that might help you. Look at this. This is a source I don't want anybody to ignore, right? What is this? This is from the Jim Crow Museum of Ferris State University, and it's about
An ordinary cup
specific
of
battle
tea.
royale that
But
happened
listen to what
in May of
happens when I say
2014.
the words
Well,
a
it was published
and
in May of
of
2014, but
A
this
cup of
happened
tea.
in 1914,
A cup of tea.
right? And it's describing
The
a
words
battle
a
royale
and
just
of
like the one our
become
character was
schwa.
fighting in.
Oh
My goodness. And
Now
it's even
you
got
try, listen
original
and
sources
repeat after me.
talking about
cup
it
of
from the
tea.
newspapers at
A
the
cup
time.
of tea.
Right? So absolutely fascinating
Now this is
stuff
such a
here. So
natural
make
and
sure you
common
know
way
your
to pronounce
terms.
cup of
Jim
that
Crow.
in British English
You
the
could
word
also look
cuppa
up
actually means
bare
a cup of tea.
knuckle boxing.
And after all that, I'm really looking
and
forward to my
Jim
cuppa.
Crow. Just because that's the era that
Actually,
that we
what
were
I
writing
really
about.
fancy is a piece of cake.
Rebel of the Progressive Era, Unforgivable Blacks, the biggest challenge of racist objects. Look back at the monumental fight that inspired the Royale. Absolutely. Fantastic. So we take a look at some of these bare knuckle boxing fights, and we look at that. But we've got to experiment
This is a
with
short
what we're
vowel
looking
sound.
for. So,
It's pronounced eh.
when did the
Now
mom
you try.
from Two
Listen
Kinds
again
immigrate?
and repeat after me. Eh. Eh. Now here are some words which have this sound.
Do you remember what year that
Dress,
was?
head, bed, many. Now you try. Listen again and repeat after
Oh
me.
dear, you don't remember what year that
Dress.
was? You should.
Head, bed,
I'll give you the first two digits.
many. Good. Speakers of some languages may have difficulty
40s.
telling the
It was
difference
49.
between this sound, the short vowel eh,
So growth and,
another sound, the
inclusion.
short
So
vowel
Chinese
eh.
immigration in
Listen
the historic,
carefully to hear the difference.
PBS is pretty good.
In
Wikipedia,
each example,
not so
I'll
much.
say the word with the short vowel
World War
eh
II home front
first.
era, not really. The history
Bed,
of Chinese immigration to the
big,
United States
medal,
might be pretty good.
middle,
This one is from the
dead,
government archives, so
big,
that's a pretty reliable
fell,
one. So if you're
fill,
looking for things for history, make sure you plant
Now
it
you
solidly
try.
in the history
Listen
in your
carefully
search.
and repeat
Right?
after me. Bed,
Make sure that you've gone over the
bid,
history of it in your mind and found
medal,
those historical markers
middle,
in the text, right?
dead,
So
did,
let's talk for a second. I'm going to stop the share.
fell,
Let's talk for a second about the boundary
fill,
between historical
pen,
context and cultural context.
pin,
Okay? And I'm going to give you
good.
an example. The cultural context for Ralph Ellison is going to be about those bare knuckle boxing fights, right? The history is going to be about the Jim Crow era in particular, right?
This is a
Or
short
more,
vowel
actually,
sound.
not in particular,
It's
but a
pronounced
little bit more generally,
ah.
right? So the cultural
Now
context
you
is going to
try.
be
Listen
what
and
the
repeat after
characters
me.
are engaging in specifically. So cultural context in Alice Walker might
Now
be
here
the
are some
value
words
of
which
the
have
women's
this sound.
quilts,
Trap,
or that
stamp,
Back to Africa movement.
back,
But the history is
lap.
going to be what's going on in
Now
the
you try.
1960s
Listen
and
carefully
70s
and
as
repeat
a whole,
after me.
right? So the
Trap.
culture might be the quilts,
Stamp,
and the history might be the Back to Africa movements.
back,
Yes. So for Amy Tan, you've
lap.
got a couple of cultural things.
Good.
You can do the culture of the prodigy, right? of what is it? What is that culture of the prodigy, or even the Asian American prodigy, right? And then you've got the history of the mother's
This is a long
immigration.
vowel sound.
Does that
It's
make
pronounced
sense? And
E.
why she immigrated, what was going
Now
on
you
in China,
try.
why
Repeat
were
after
people
me.
coming, and you've got that
E.
history.
E.
In
Now here are
let's
some
take a
words
look at
which have
Gilman
this
for a second.
sound.
We haven't talked about her.
Fleece.
You know for sure the
Sea.
cultural context is the rest
Machine.
cure. Because
Now
I
you
told
try.
you that.
Repeat after me.
Right? There's
Fleece.
only one cultural context for that, which is that
Sea.
she was prescribed the rest cure and it was
Machine.
horrible. So she's fighting against
Good.
that. But the history is the history of the Golden Age, of what other
For speakers of some languages,
things
it
that
can be
women
difficult to
perhaps
tell
were
the
not
difference
allowed
between
to
this
do
sound,
at the
the
time. Were
long
women
vowel
allowed
E,
to open
and another
a line
sound,
of
the
credit?
short
Were they
vowel
allowed
I.
to inherit property?
Here
Were
are
they
some
allowed
examples
to vote?
where you can hear the
right? And you're
difference.
thinking about the rest
Liter.
of the history around
Litter.
that character. Or
Cheap.
you're thinking about the
Chip.
history of mental illness.
Feet.
What did
He's.
what did mental
His.
health asylums look like
Peach.
at that time?
Pitch.
Right? You're looking
Sheep.
at the history of mental health
Ship.
treatment, perhaps. Right?
Now you try.
And so
Listen carefully
you're looking
and
at two
repeat
different
after
things
me.
a little
In
bit.
each
So make sure
example,
that you're
the vowel
looking
with the
for
long
two
sound
different things.
is first.
And that you're not just like bare knuckle
Liter.
boxing, right? Bare knuckle boxing
Litter.
is the cultural phenomenon, but it's inside that
Cheap.
Jim Crow era that we've got to learn about. Yes? Because
Chip.
there's other things going on in Jim Crow other than just the
Feet.
bare knuckle boxing fights. Right?
Fit.
The rest cure, yes, that's the cultural context,
He's.
but the character is living in a time
His.
where the rest cure made sense because they
Peach.
thought women couldn't be intellectual without ruining
Pitch.
ourselves physically and
Sheep.
psychiatrically. That thinking was
Ship.
too much for us, our poor little brains.
Good.
And we've got to get a sense of that history. We're living in a time where anyone with depression or hallucinatory symptoms was just going to be locked away, right? Rather than offered any kind of effective treatment.
This is a long vowel sound.
So
it's pronounced.
we've got to think about the history and the cultural
Now
phenomenon
you
separately.
try.
We've got
Repeat
Alice
after me.
Walker and her quilts
Ooh.
that they're fighting over. But what's the history that's making them fight over this quilt at this point in time? Right? Does
Now
that
here are
make
some
sense?
words which have this sound.
All right. So make sure
Goose.
that your biography is one that
Two.
connects and makes you think,
Blue.
this explains why this
Group.
author is writing this
Now you
kind of
try.
story.
Listen carefully
Choose
and
a
repeat
history
after me.
that's the history
Goose.
that makes the cultural context fight happen.
Two.
And then the cultural context is what, it's almost like
Blue.
the complicating factor in the plot, right? What's happening
Group.
to cause that conflict. So that's a good way
Good.
to think about the biography versus the history versus the cultural context. The cultural context is what the characters are fighting over or struggling with, right? The historical
This is a
context
long
is
vowel
why that's
sound.
even an
It's
issue at this
pronounced
time,
R.
right? Or for these characters.
Now you try.
And the
Repeat
biography
after
is
me.
why the author would be
R.
writing a story like this. What about their own
R.
story makes
Now
them
here are some
inspired
words which
to
have
write a
this
story
sound.
like this one?
Father.
Okay, so do you know what you're looking
Start.
for now?
Hard.
We are avoiding encyclopedias.
Now you
we are
try.
avoiding Cliff
Listen
Notes. We are
carefully and
avoiding
repeat after
Wikipedia.
me.
You're looking for things
Father.
sponsored by universities or by government sites if it's
Start.
history, or by a
Hard.
website that specializes in biographies of authors. I'll let you do one of those, right? Not an encyclopedia, but something like FemBio or biography.com or something like that. I'll take that. Okay? All right. I'm going to pause the recording.